Hey, GLP1 plus size community. Before we jump into the podcast, please take the time to leave us a 5-star review on whatever audio platform you're listening to the podcast on. Share your story and how the podcast has helped you. This will help us get referred up in the audio platform so that we can reach more people that need our help, our support, and guidance from our doctors. Help us get loud and change things. Are you interested in understanding GLP-1 medications like Ozempic, Wegovy, or Mounjaro? Then join us on the Plus Sides, Cracking the Obesity Code, the groundbreaking podcast helping people change their lives one episode at a time. The Plus Sides podcast is a disruptor. We're breaking down barriers, smashing stereotypes, and sharing inspiring stories that'll leave you feeling informed and empowered. Join us every week to learn from doctors who are specialists around GLP-1 medications like Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro. They'll provide you with science and facts to validate these incredible stories. But that's not all. We'll also bring you the voices of the GLP-1 Mounjaro TikTok community, real people who face the challenges of obesity-related diseases and disorders and discovered the incredible plus sides of GLP-1 medications. Our episodes are filled with heartwarming stories, laughter, and moments of triumph. You'll connect with our amazing community members who are reclaiming their health and experiencing their fullest lives. Are you ready to embark on a journey of discovery and empowerment? Tune in to the Plus Sides, Cracking the Obesity Code, and together we'll change the narrative around obesity and end the stigma. Subscribe now on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform and join our incredible community. Let's celebrate the plus sides of life together because every story deserves to be heard. Every life deserves to shine, and everyone deserves access to expert knowledge and medication. The Plus Sides Podcast. You're not alone. It's not your fault.
"20 seconds a week to lose 20% of your weight in a year with diet and exercise. That's the power of GLP-1s through Ro. Ro helps find the medication that's right for you, based on cost, availability, and your weight loss goals. Losing weight with GLP-1s is possible through Ro.
Yeah. I have a question about that when you're talking about set weight, because I gained and lost a lot of weight as a child growing up. And I do remember at one point, the first time I lost a significant amount of weight, for me, I was 12, I lost 34 pounds. And I went from 170 to 130. Was it 40? I can't do math. I'm a communications major. I didn't do math. Did I start to create a set point as I grew in? Because I slowly started to gradually put it back on a little bit as I got older and into my teens, and then it would yo-yo.
Right.
So would that be the beginning of playing with set weight? Does that?
I think
sense?
You mean like you've set your set point higher because of the initial cycling that was happening? You mean?
Yes.
Kat, I don't think anyone knows yet.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think anyone knows like what the effects of rapid weight gain in childhood and rapid weight loss in childhood, because as you know, like after you've reached puberty, your body is like in a certain like a growing body is it's even more complicated. And there's definitely something, because we know like if you gain weight rapidly in the first 2 years of life, you have an increased chance of having obesity later. So we know some things, but that specific question, I'm not sure. It's a great one. And it's stuff I hope science continues to uncover, but I'm not sure that we know, because if we did, I think we would be counseling a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think that's why they call it like the theory too, right? The idea of the theory is that it's not necessarily like a proven, but it's a working theory. And like I do think I have had that same experience, like since I was a young girl, like 20 pounds, 30 pounds, up 20 pounds, up 30 pounds, up 40 pounds. I've been doing this my whole life. My first time at 8, I think my mom always sort of struggled with maybe 10 or 20 pounds, not a ton. And she was actually always, I don't know, I would say sort of kind of like bordering on petite versus normal, and very athletic. And she had my middle sister, and I was 8, and she was trying to lose the baby weight. And we went on Weight Watchers together, and I was 8. So I remember standing over a rice cake in the kitchen with her, drizzling chocolate sauce in the 80s.
Yum.
Something that would taste good to our brain so that we could go to sleep, because that's what it was like for us, right? But my mom thought she's a very good, kind mom. She thought she was teaching me to eat, how to eat, right?
Yeah.
She thought, oh, Weight Watchers is everything in moderation. I'm teaching my child how to eat. I'm teaching my child how to choose a rice cake with syrup over a piece of cake that may harm her, right? I know my mom really well in her heart, and for sure that's what she was doing.
Of course, yeah.
That is not what it taught me, and because it was a diet, a restrictive diet, and that's not what it taught me. But I think that we were also very close because we went through a lot of trauma really early, and so it was just we were like closer in age. She had me pretty young, so it's just sort of a different dynamic in general, more like friends sometimes than mother daughter. And I think also helping raise my sisters and stuff like that. Like it was just because of the age difference, right? Because of the babysitting and things like that. Like it was just a different dynamic. And so in general, like when it comes to like choosing food, I remember from a young age, feeling like I needed to feel better. My mom and my dad, or my mother and father, divorced very young, when I was like a baby. And then she remarried my dad, and my dad's great. I love my dad. And he eventually adopted me, but he is fantastic. But I had a lot of feelings about that. You know what I mean? Like, and I didn't really know what to do with them. And looking back, I think I solved for them by controlling my food. And I used to stay in the bonus room in our old house, and I would come down the stairs in the middle of the night, right? And I would soothe myself with food. And then I remember coming home from school and being so glad that I could eat by myself. And there was no one there to judge me. I could eat what I wanted, how much I wanted, because I was latchkey, right? No one was going to, come at me. And that like continued to be like a behavior that I would perpetuate like for the rest of my life, and even now, though I will say now that I've gotten to a better metabolic state with GLP-1s, it's still a behavior that sometimes my brain tries to do. The difference is I catch it. And I go, I don't think that's what's actually happening here. Let's make a different choice. Like Kat was talking about, like, before you guys get here. But, so I think that was like, it's interesting, like what happens to us and the trauma of that. I recently made a TikTok. I think we're all free flowing now. I recently made a TikTok where one of the doctors that have been on our show, that's an obesity specialist, said, I've been asked to kind of help educate other doctors about obesity and how to treat patients. Like, what would you want them to know as a patient? And I said that you should ask for consent. And that has been a very controversial thing with people. And what I meant by that is consent to talk about your weight. If the person's not there to talk about their weight, just ask them, can we talk about it? Not because the intent is for them to go, no, we can't, right? But the intent is to make them feel more comfortable and in a safe place, because you're asking permission to talk about something they likely have a lot of trauma behind. And I've had people that even love doctors that love the show that have made comments on this podcast that they're like, that changes the power dynamic and I'm not going to do that and stuff like that. And which I think is absurd. And other people are like, no, the doctor never has to ask permission to discuss my weight. That's ridiculous. He's the doctor. And I'm like, but he's supposed to be like your partner, like, but it is very controversial. Like it's,
most you would be happy to know. Kim, you would be happy to know in the first few pages of the AAP guidelines, they recommend asking for consent. So
yeah.
Like,
so
can you talk about it?
To your children and also you to ask for consent. Yeah.
Like, I even feel like from a psychological perspective, it just makes people feel more in control of a situation where they're already not in control, to get news they already know they're going to get that they don't want to hear, that they've been told forever, and I will tell you, like, all the years that I've struggled with my weight, nobody ever said to me, hey, like, did you know obesity is a chronic disease? Yep. Did you know there are treatments? Did you know it's not your fault? Did you know? I've had lap band surgery, and even my surgeon never said to me, did you know obesity is a chronic disease? Like, never. Nobody ever said that to me. And that blows my mind. Like, I feel like we need to start having this conversation about how this is a disease and deserves to be treated as so. And it is complex, right? So there's not just one size fits all solution, like there is to many things. But I think that it's important that we start to talk about it and have an open dialogue. And I think when people just go, like, I'm telling you, the first thing that my OB said when I walked in pregnant was, I never even met her. She said, your weight's a concern. That's it. I'm like, I'm already pregnant. Can we talk about something else? Like, I mean, like, do you know, like, what? I mean, I know I have obesity. I know it's a concern. Like, you guys have been telling me this forever, you know? And it's just like, it's kind of a hodgepodge hot mess when it comes to like your experiences, and the way people treat you, I think, with empathy and kindness and caring at the doctor's office, you know?
I just wanted to say, like, when this topic comes up in a room where you have like, several family members, probably siblings, mom and dad, and, and they're bringing this up, and you can instantly see the child's face, like, just drop, right? Like, here it comes. Like, here it comes. We're talking about my weight. And they don't necessarily even have to be larger, right? Like, it could be any topic about they've gained some weight, right? And like, I mean, and I know Sammy's very sensitive about it, but like, I've lived through it, right? So like, I'm even like more, I just feel it, right, for them. And so I kind of just, and I think everyone uses different approaches, but mental health and obesity are kind of, used as this is something you can control, right? That's the narrative that happens. Like, you're pregnant, you're overweight, this is a problem, and you haven't done enough, right? You're anxious, you can snap out of it, or you have depression, right? So I use both of those kind of in a way to say, okay, if you came in here and I saw your blood pressure was high, right? And I would say, okay, let's take some first steps, to see if we can help your blood pressure, right? Like, we would talk about our salt intake, our diet intake, our exercise, our family members, who has high blood pressure. Like, we would talk about all these things, right? And then the next time you come in, I would say your blood pressure is still high. We've tried all these things. Now we have to think about the next step, which is medications, and everything is like a risk benefit. Of course, every medication has side effects. Antibiotics have side effects. But when you have a pneumonia, you're going to take the antibiotic, right? Because now the effects of that pneumonia are way more detrimental, right? Same with obesity, same with anxiety, same with depression. If you're able to manage it conservatively and it's happening, you're able to do it. But if you're not, then, being depressed, being anxious, not even being able to leave the house. I mean, we see children all the time because mental health, not only because of their weight, but because of so many things, right? So if it's debilitating you and it's putting you at risk for other things, then we got to talk about the next step. But but nobody talks about the options, right? Because up until now, we had limited options. We did have options, but it just wasn't treated, like you said, as a disease.
Yeah.
Right. I have a question to build on that. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add one thing on the consent thing, because there is so much that we just have to fix, and just starting to think about it. We're just starting to discuss it. Things like what you guys are doing are just starting to bring this in. But there's so much work to do. And if you just think about the fact that if we have a patient, for example, that is anorexic and has a low BMI, for lack of other explanatory terms, we do not talk about their weight. Yeah. If we do have to weigh them, we do it blinded. So that is the least of the discussion. The discussion is solely focused on health and, fueling your body and whatever, because we don't want to perpetuate that kind of
obsessive kind of compulsion,
right? Tendency to focus on why is obesity any different?
Why is it?
Right. So why right? So why are we so sensitive about discussing weight on that end of the spectrum, but on the other end, it's like we just throw it at your face every time you're here. You weigh this much, you did this much, you went up and down this much, like constant barrage, as if that's the only thing that matters, right? Like, so, and then we're just perpetuating this, cycle. And so I just wanted to add that one thing about the consent part.
Right. But on the question that I have for you. Oh, go ahead, Sabrina.
You go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's true though, because there are so many of us who avoided the doctor for so many years because of that very reason. Every single time I went to the doctor, it could have been for whatever ailment, my elbow hurts or whatever. It's because you're overweight, it never mattered. So then I stopped going because I didn't want to, want that to be the one thing that they told me. It didn't matter what was wrong with me because it always came back to my weight.
I'm so tired of it. And I just want you to know, like, I've done a lot of unlearning. There was a period of time where, you know, the guidelines were different. We thought we were doing good by talking to them about eating healthy. We didn't, again, same thing as your mom, Kim. Like, it's not like I was trying to, but then I really had to do some self-reflection and go, I don't want a single one of my patients to grow up and remember me making them feel bad. Like that, I failed. I might as well retire if any one of them walks out ever saying, Dr. Sammy made me feel bad about myself or my weight or how I look or anything, my health, anything. Like, my only job is to encourage them, make them feel better walking out than walking in. But that took unlearning on my part. Like, that, I didn't hop out of medical school like that, you know? So just wanted to.
And I think that there's probably also some people that are responding in the comments on that video that are going, you know, that maybe they didn't even think about it. Do you know what I mean? Like, no, he doesn't have to ask. Would it have made a difference? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, just think about it, right? Like, and commenter, who's a doctor that watches this show and has made that thing, I hope you will just think about why you don't want to do that and have some self-reflection, because this could change the patient experience and then change the treatment and change the outcome if you would just show a little bit of kindness, empathy, and emotional intelligence at the very beginning of the conversation. Like, it really would, you know?
But also, what makes you think they haven't tried?
I know, right? Like, if for just that, like, but there's a massive assumption that we haven't, right? There's a massive assumption that if you are fat, you are lazy. If you are fat, you are gluttonous, period. Like,
exactly. And,
you know?
And the fact that, you know, like, oh, you think you've got the aha, right? Like, oh, I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
I'll get to that on it tomorrow. Right. Like,
right. So speaking when I'm still like it, what Dr. Anna mentioned, when you have the whole family in the doctor's office, and I hear it now, like, yeah, my child, Kathy, is so big. She's gotten so heavy. That's what my family calls me, Kathy. And you're right. I just wanted to shrink into the wall. But building on that, in today's climate, this is different. This was the 80s. That's how old I am. But in today's climate, how do we advise our parents that a lot of the people in our community, they may have kids that are struggling with obesity as well? How do we approach it without singling them out of your entire family? Because I know that the way I grew up, my siblings could be real a-holes as well. It was a interesting environment that I grew up in. But in any case, but how do we I guess lessen the blow? Like, how do we address this for that one child and not have them feel so singled out? Do you get those questions sometimes? Do sometimes parents ask you?
Always.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
That's it.
No,
That's
you say yours. You say yours, and I'll say mine as a mom. Go.
Okay. Yeah. So I think sometimes when those questions come up, like you mentioned with anorexia, with eating disorders, we have like a very like regimented thing. Like, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to talk about. Right. With obesity, we just get thrown that question. Right. And it's like, how do you address the parent's concern? Right. And how do you address it in front of the child with all the other children listening? Right. And then, I mean, do you separate them, right? Do you have like individual discussions, right? There's a lot to consider there. And there's the family dynamics and all of that. So in the beginning, I personally try to say, you know, to me, and kind of what I tell them is, I'm not really looking at a number. Like, I'm not isolating and saying I'm looking at a number and you're this much weight and you're this much weight. Like, I'm not looking at numbers, you know, I'm looking at your overall health, your overall habits, what your trends are. You know, I'm looking at all of that. And so I try to use my experience a lot. And I feel like those kids that kind of their face dropped, I feel like when I make it personal, like about me, you know, like, I did have this, you know, I was always the larger one in the family, and, you know, and so when I think I make it personal or I make it anecdotal, then I try to diffuse as much as I can to signal to the parents that This is no one's fault. This is, there's multiple things in place, and we're going to discuss it in terms of health in a safe place. And there's not that judgment and blame. And so I just try to set that tone as kindly as I can. Not for the parents, because we're all, like Sammy said, we're all doing the unlearning. We're all doing the work to hear what we say. Even as physicians, even as parents, we're doing all that work. And so if you approach it with empathy and kindness, and then when you kind of set that tone where like, this is not one person, we're talking about habits for everyone. We're talking about goals for everyone. So, all of that. And you can't really demonize food either, right? Like we talk about socioeconomic status. We talk about parents working multiple jobs, what they can afford to put. I cannot make them feel bad about the McDonald's and the things that they have access to, right? And so it has to be very not being perfect, but making little steps in, for us, for our bodies, doing little things that we can do that takes the pressure off, and it doesn't isolate anyone or blame anyone. I mean, I don't know. I'm still figuring it out.
Yeah.
But it's hard.
Like it's probably different every family,
Yeah. I can say, let's take you, for example, Kat. Okay. You come in my exam room, you've got your siblings there, and then your mom brings up the concern. I do now, my approach is to not put attention on you, that patient. So I immediately will be like, hey, guess what? Bodies come in all shapes and sizes. I couldn't care less about, I don't use those words, but I say like, I do not, the numbers for same as Anna don't matter to me. And then I go, there's 4 pillars of health, and I address the whole room, brothers and the patient.
Yes.
Who knows what the 4 pillars of health are? And we kind of make like a fun game out of it. Like, sleeping well, mental health, get our bodies moving, nourish our bodies. That's what we're aiming. So we talk about. So then I'll be like, hey, brother number 1, like, do you think you hit all of those? Where do you think you could do better? And then the mom will be like, well, I think sleeping, you're really cutting down on that. So then it kind of just diffuses the situation where I'm not like, hey, you one patient that your mom just brought up. And then I want all of them to do all of the things. Right. So I don't honestly care if the, for lack of a better word, skinny brother is skinny, but then isn't taking care of his mental health, is eating bad, is not moving, and so it's not doing. So I'm equally as concerned about you, and I want mom to be as equally concerned about you. And and chances are the person that they're worried about is the one that's trying the hardest because of our society. So that's how I kind of broach it now. So where I'm not putting like the focus on that person, and I'm just talking about what healthy means. It's like a whole, it's a whole thing. So, but then again, as a mom, I struggle with it because of society. And so from the get-go for us, it's been, we don't comment on other people's bodies. And if we want to describe other people, we find other descriptive terms to describe them to each other. And we talk about, people's positive attributes, and we try our best in our household to like do what Anna's parents did, which is like a barrage of compliments all the time that are not always, it's not always like a superficial thing either, right? Like, you're strong. Oh, wow, you learned that quickly. Look how much you worked hard on that. Look, we're just constantly like, good job.
I really appreciate that. I think that's, I guess the key is to not single out that child and make it a whole family thing. Like, we all are in this together. Like, we're all going to work on bettering our health, not just that one sibling. Because, by nature, kids can be little, jerk holes to each other. So, sometimes.
Not jerk holes.
And almost signaling out the other ones, like Sammy said. Like, I'll say, look, like, it doesn't matter to me if you're here or you're here, because we're all different heights, we're all different shapes, right? But the key principles are the same. And like, you have to remove the, like you said, the focus from that one child that's feeling horrible at the moment,
Absolutely.
But we have so much individuality too. And that's one thing that I just, the reason that this whole video came about, that got us like talking to each other. I hate generalizations. I just really don't like them. I don't like saying like a group of people are a certain way or whatever. You just don't know. I have the, the patient that comes in with the siblings, that's got that situation. And then I'll have a 17-year-old or 18-year-old that comes by themselves and says, Dr. Sammy, I've been trying to lose weight. What do I do? And then for that one, I'm like, wait, why are you trying to lose weight? What are your goals? Like, we're having a whole other conversation here. And the plan is going to be totally different. So it cannot be this like one side. That's why it was 100 pages of we don't know anything. That document,
that's incredible. It is so complicated. I mean, it's like
so complicated.
I think that what might be good is that there are some, and this is when I feel like the conversation got big in the community. It was last year. It was probably about the time the savings card changed and the first shortage happened, and we were all having a lot of realizations. So from people who are moms to people who are grandmoms, I say moms because there just weren't a lot of outspoken men in the community then, but there are a lot more now, which I'm so thankful for. But they were like, okay, so this is the solution for us. What about our children? And that has been I feel
food has definitely been a very dominant voice in my head. That's not the main focus anymore. Dieting, exercising, and adding GLP1s through Row is a game changer. I have such a sense of mental freedom since I started with Row. Food no longer controls my thoughts. Family time used to revolve around food, and now it revolves around what we're gonna go do together.
I feel like a very complicated decision, because it is still said that when you get off these medicines, you're going to gain it back. Like it's a very, very common thing, because it is what most of the studies show, right? But we know that that's because of obesity, right? We do know obesity is a chronic disease. We know it's multifactorial. We know it's a chronic inflammatory condition, right? But we do know that ultimately the chronic part is one of the most important pieces, right? And I think that when we are talking about, like, especially young girls who are struggling with their cycles, right? And possibly PCOS and things like that, we learned that it's taking, from one of our endocrinologists, that it's taking about 5 years for an adult to be diagnosed with PCOS, right? Okay. So how long is it taking for kids? And do you see that in adolescents? Like, or is that, because I feel like I don't even know what age, because I don't think I started going to an OB until I was probably sexually active. So I'm curious, like, what your experience has been like with that.
I mean, so I think because as pediatricians, we're seeing kids so routinely, and we're seeing them in these very specific intervals for the most part, right? That I start talking about puberty, before we're even close to that, right? So we start prefacing, we specialize in preventative care. That's why we went into pediatrics, because we're always trying to talk about things ahead of time, so that we can do the best to prevent problems, and so when it comes to puberty, I'll have that discussion with families, whoever is comfortable and wants me to have that discussion, right? And so when we talk about cycles, we talk about it, all those checkups, this is normal if your cycles are not regular in the first year or so, 1 to 2 years, because we know that you can have anovulatory cycles, you might not have regular periods, right? But after this point, if you're noticing this, and this, irregular cycles, multiple different things, then I want you to let me know. So we do refer children to gynecology. They don't necessarily get the full well woman exam, younger kids and the ones before they're sexually active. But we do assess hormones. We do imaging. We try to be as proactive as we can to kind of recognize it and treat it as early as we can.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Sammy. Yeah.
Do you guys hear kids ever describe food noise? Whether they've tried one or not, or whether they've tried one or not. Like, do they tell you about it? Like,
whether they what? Sorry.
Like, do they ever say, like, I always think about food, or I'm always hungry? Like, do they ever use
always hungry?
Yes.
Always. Yes. Yeah. That is a very common descriptive term, not only from the kids, but from the parents as well.
From the parents.
So yes.
Yeah. I think there's such a difference in those things, right? Being always hungry and always thinking about food, And have you guys had experience treating any of your adolescents with a GLP-1, or do you usually refer them out?
Yeah. It's still, I have not incorporated into my practice. I haven't even been asked, honestly. Maybe one case, one specific. It was actually the Prader-Willi patient that yeah. And I felt that he particularly needed more specialized attention, and so we work in we're in a really nice area where there's like adolescent specialists and gynecologists for pediatricians for kids. So, I mean, we have access to a lot. So that one I got help with, but I'm definitely not opposed to it. But I feel, for us, still quite new.
Yeah. I mean, it is though. Like, I think I'm trying to remember like how long it's been since Saxenda was approved for adolescents. I can't remember. But
it's been a while, I think.
Yeah, it has been a while. I mean, so I know Victoza came out 2012. I figured it was probably on market for a couple of years, and then that's when Saxenda came out. But I figure it probably would have taken a little while to get approved for adolescents, but I'm not sure. Kim, Google later.
In my experience, I have had some families that have experience with GLPs themselves, and then they are very, pro, and they want to be very proactive for their children because they're seeing some of the same patterns. And so I've seen a lot of them take charge and sometimes even go to other clinics, that could be doing it, which I don't necessarily always know what the credentials are for those providers that are, so, and I think in the future, because of my own journey with medications and weight loss and all of that, I feel like I would be willing to. But like you mentioned, I feel like the studies are still, lacking, especially when you incorporate growth and development. And so that is the biggest thing I think that's holding me back. But I let them know very early on that there are options. And I let them know very early on that we're going to do everything we can to help them on this journey, whether it's mental health, whether it's, food noise, whether it's genetics, whatever it is. Like, all I can say, and I'm going to do everything in my power to get you those resources to what I can. And we're going to start with the basics and we're going to work our way up. And then at each step, we're going to check in and we're going to decide, what is the risk and benefit of every decision we're making. And we're not just going to say, okay, you're going for surgery, you're going for this. And, everything is going to be a very, it's going to be a comprehensive discussion. And if I would want them to have the best care, the most specialized care, if they're going to do something. So like we send them to gynecology, a lot of times we can do a lot of that testing, but I want them to get specialized because like Sammy said, we have access to that. So we can utilize that. So if we have obesity specialists,
Thank you for doing that. Like the amount of doctors that will just say no. And will make some offhanded comment like that's only for diabetics, as opposed to just referring to a specialist blows my mind. Like it happens so often in our community.
And I will say one last thing too, that I definitely do prescribe other pharmaceutical options other than GLPs for obesity. And I'm going to leave it there because the amount of hate we get when we go into detail with regards to like big pharma and all that stuff. But for sure, we do treat obesity. We just haven't delved into the
GLPs. Yeah. I get that. I mean, I think, like you said, like there have been many treatments for obesity. What the obesity specialists and endocrinologists on our show have said is that ultimately the treatments we've had in the past are treating more of the, like we talked about, I'm hungry all the time, the symptom of the disease, as opposed to the actual dysfunction, or we know generalizations, right? Many times like the biological dysfunction, the insulin resistance, things like that. But I think it's also, like you said, it's different for kids versus like when you're starting to become an adult, but that's what a lot of them have said, is that's what the difference is, right? Is this is treating the thing that's wrong. But I think there's a question, at what point when a child is in development and has obesity, is it able to be treated by treating the symptom right? And getting your body into a good place to maybe where it doesn't fully develop into, obesity. I hope that they do more studies on that. It does make parents terrified. I know when they hear about these studies being done for very young children in the news, right? They're like, what are they doing in these shots in our kids and all this different stuff? And you're like, that the shot is like, if you're listening to this, please know that's just how it's administered. Like, it's just a subcutaneous needle. Like, it's not, hormone replacement therapy or anything like that. Right. No. So, I want everybody to know that, like, I think that it's an option. And there are not a lot of obesity specialists, and there certainly are not a lot of pediatric obesity specialists. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think it's wonderful to be able to have a candid conversation with your doctor and say, can we talk about my child's weight? Right. Yeah. And, and I think that that's good that if doctors are receptive and are able to refer them to the place that fits them best. I think that's great. Yeah. You won't get that hate here. People are very on this podcast. Like, people, no, they want this information. I would say our other childhood obesity episodes have done very well. If it helps at all, I will tell you that the majority of the people that have been on this show that have struggled with childhood obesity, which is the majority of the people that have been on the show from our community, have all said that they would have loved to have had something when they were in high school, especially because of the social ramifications dealt with in high school, by not being able to participate, in a lot of different things because of their weight, which of course made them feel more outcasted. And then of course that affect their mental health. So many people have said that if it was an option, then they would have loved to have known about it. So I hope that we can do more to, possibly, maybe it's less around 12, right? But maybe it's more around 16, have more conversations about what that could mean for these adolescents. And I hope we have more studies soon, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope so too. It's really much needed because we're in the business of prevention, right? And that's the key.
The prevention is where we found a manure.
I've actually got a question. Much of the public may think that they know the long-term effects of childhood obesity. However, can you share with us what some of them are and how long-term psychological effects as well?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the stuff that we did talk about, at the basis of it, it's an insulin resistance issue, right? Whether it's obesity, whether it's PCOS, whether it's diabetes, we call it metabolic syndrome, right? Because a lot of people have this triad of, your body is just not able to metabolize the sugars, your body is resistant to the hormone. And so, you could be doing everything, but it's not able to do that job metabolically, right? So all the things that can come along with that, I feel like are the complications, like type 2 diabetes, like heart disease, like, high cholesterol, all of these things I think are generally the clinical or the metabolic complications that could happen. And then mental health is a whole other, it's a whole other thing, but that's, it's less about even weight as far as mental health, but we see that on the other end with anorexia and bulimia and our view of our body and our view of our body in relation to other people. So I think, but those are kind of the top ones that I would think about.
Yeah.
I love it. It's very, very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been a lovely conversation. Is there anything that you guys wanted to share with us? I do feel like that we didn't dig in too much around, and if you would indulge me just a little bit, Dr. Sammy, in your video where you were, and this is like my take, so it's okay if it's not yours. But in your video where that person was commenting basically on people choosing to be in a big body, I think a lot of that, as someone who's been in a big body forever, has to do with sort of the body positivity movement and messaging, that we're all choosing to be in a big body when really the majority of us are just giving up and trying to survive. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think that there is sort of this common misconception that people are like, you're choosing to be big. You're choosing to do all of these things. And I'm curious what your take is on that.
Yeah, if you want to take my blood pressure right now, it's probably
rage.
That really gets me going. Because first of all, that is super judgmental, and it's very, there's a lot of assumptions made there, and it's insinuating. It's insinuating that you didn't try hard enough, that you didn't try diet and exercise, and you chose to be the way that you are. They were your lifestyle choices. And which, as we just unraveled in this whole podcast, is the furthest thing from the truth. And nobody chooses that. Nobody just, wakes up. I just want to, I hope we get away from that. I hope we get away from it. Like the same way you didn't choose how tall you are, you're not going to choose, how the rest of your body looks. And this is, again, the cards you've been dealt. And just because somebody else was dealt a hand of cards that made it potentially easier for them to survive in this society, it doesn't mean that they get the right to walk around and tell everybody that they chose and that they were choosing differently. I hope, Anna, that it's okay for me to say this, but we've now been friends long enough. I will tell you guys, I eat more than Anna, and I always have. Period. The end. So if you don't want to talk about choices, I've watched her. Sadly, when she was talking at the beginning, I was like trying not to get teary-eyed, because when she's talking about her diets and the restrictions that she's done, like I've looked at it and I didn't, and she's not my only friend that has struggled with this. I didn't know how to help, and on one hand, you don't want to be a jerk and like, because I've not been through it, but on the other hand, like, you're watching her essentially torture herself. Like, again, like she cannot have fruit. And I'd be like, so is this like forever? You can't have, you love grapes. Like you can't have grapes forever. Like, and then she would just be like, well, until I like, break this plateau I'm at, or maybe until da-da-da. And like, I've seen it, for years and years of her just trying like this and this and this. And so she chose correctly per people's standards and still did not get the outcome that she was aiming for or hoping for. So yeah, if you want me to, if I could talk about that all day, it just riles me up and my blood pressure goes real high. So that's when I'm gonna start cussing.
We do that here. It's fine. This is an adult podcast. Yeah. I mean, I think we have a friend, Dave. So Dave has a YouTube show where he talks a lot about like the news and what's in science with these medicines. It's fascinating. You should watch it, especially if you're like on the go and you just like want to hear some stuff that's just coming through. Like he breaks it down really great. And Dave was on our show recently again. And Dave struggles with obesity and type 2 diabetes. And he's had a lot of success on Mounjaro in terms of like, I want to say like 30 or 40 pounds. But ultimately, so in terms of his like the weight, it's not like this huge amount of weight like a lot of the other people to deal with, right? But he does have his A1C is in a good place, right? But there's a struggle there. And he mentioned, because he's writing a book about his experience, and he was saying that when he was very young, that there was as he was eating like a cutie or an orange, and somebody just kind of coming at him and being like, you don't need those carbs. Those carbs are going to make you big. Those carbs are going to make you fat. You don't need those sugars. And so then he started thinking the majority of his life, he needed to be on keto. Right. And that was a horrible like cycle for him. And I think we all need to think really long and hard about how we talk about what our kids are eating when they're eating them. Right. It is not something to eat less, move more, or anything like that. Like my son and I, we talk about, hey, listen, like it is much harder for the most part, in my experience, when you have an autistic child. Food is, it's a hard conversation. It's hard enough just to get him to eat. Like, so because of textures, like there's so many different things like that he will have reactions to and meltdowns too, right? If it's not the way. And I get a tremendous amount of judgment as his mother for whatever I do or don't let him eat. I mean, even for my parents. And it's gotten to the point, even with my parents, where like at some point, like they made my son a hamburger on the grill. They made it in foil to try to make it like where it wasn't like have texture. It would be a better texture for him. And it burned the bottom and he didn't want to eat it. And my dad goes, I just leave him on the side of the road. So like those kinds of comments, like I know my dad doesn't mean that, right? But those kinds of comments are like not good for autistic kid and they're not good for a regular kid. None of those do anybody any good. And any kind of conversation around food, that sets things up for the rest of your life. These are a conversation about food is just as important as a conversation about sex. As a conversation about, intimacy, is just as much as a conversation about any kind of other health or any other important thing. Love. I mean, any of those things, it should be treated as that important and precious and well thought out. I really think that, and I think that we all need to realize that we know that there's like this foundation for obesity, but we also know, like we mentioned again, like it is multifactorial. We know there are different things that can contribute and possibly have somebody have obesity and possibly don't. I hope very much my son doesn't ever, but at least I know that there are treatments for it. And maybe he never has to suffer for 40 years like I did, Yeah. And so we have to think about this differently. And so I'm literally now devoted my life to this. So let's see how it goes.
And he's very lucky because you have that insight. You've dealt with it, right? You know how to talk to him, like that is huge. That is huge. What I love what Sammy said in that video was, as physicians, the more we learn, the more we realize how little control we have over most things. Yeah. And the one thing we do have control over is to be kind and to try to understand that people don't live in your shoes and that you could not understand the experience they're going through, regardless of what it is, right? That's the one thing we have some control over, right? Yeah. And that's the one thing I feel like people lose sight of, and when we were talking before about just the food noise, for me, the food noise was opposite. Like I was obsessed by food because I was measuring everything. I had gotten to that point where I was calculating how much protein I needed to have. And I grew up vegetarian, so for me, it was very difficult to, and I couldn't eat that much. And so I had to get massive amounts of protein, to be able to counteract, to maintain the weight or lose the weight, And so I think I was doing it so clinically. I was obsessed about food. And then once I found that there were options, like GLP, like other options, and I don't know if you guys saw that Oprah, I think everybody saw that whole Oprah special, but it was like the only way to describe it is that you get freedom, whether it's the freedom of not having the food noise where you only think about that, or it's the opposite where you're obsessing about how do I reverse this cycle, and I had a little bit of like, I'm gonna beat this, I'm gonna do it, right? Like I have the knowledge, I have I've learned about how things work, so I'm gonna crack the code, right? But that alone tells you that we don't have the choice, right? Nobody can crack that code, right? And you could do the best you can, but
even Oprah, who has every resource at her disposal,
every single one
struggled with obesity, right? Yeah. Like we had, I don't know if you guys know, we had Rosie O'Donnell on our podcast. We were, it was our,
that was a great episode. I loved it.
Yeah. And she was talking about, this was a year ago, and she was one of the first celebrities that came out and was like, yeah, this should be for everybody, because I didn't always have type 2 diabetes and now I do, and it sucks, right? Yeah. And she talks about it very openly and very candidly and talks about her weight story and all. But she makes a comment in there. She's like, if even Oprah, like, she's like, but it's funny though, because when she's so candid, when Oprah came and said like, yeah, I'm taking a GLP-1, and I was like, well, the article says that she's doing it for maintenance, and really goes, yeah, she got on my live with me on TikTok. She goes, I don't believe that. I think she was always taking it. And I'm like, who cares? Like, I don't care. Like, as long as, I think it's amazing that she's come forth and said anything about her health, but it is an example of like how obesity doesn't care, right? They don't care how rich you are. They don't care, or anything like it. It's coming for you, So it's like, I think we have to, like you said, like the amount of kindness and just like, into the doctors out there, just any of them that are listening, just having a quick second to say, can we talk about your health? After you've done the weigh-in on the scale, after you've said hello, can we talk about your weight? Mm-hmm. It takes literally, how many seconds is that? Not even one, right? And then just let the conversation flow. But there's something going on there where people aren't wanting to let that go. And I which I think is ridiculous. I feel like some people are like, well, if I went to any specialist for anything, I would expect them just to tell me all the things. Why? Most specialists will say, why are you here today? Let's talk about why you're here. What do you want to talk about? You know what I'm saying? Like, people have forgotten these like soft skills, you know, like let's get them back in, you know?
Well, it's just, if you've been practicing medicine, this is me telling other doctors, if you've been practicing medicine for more than 5 minutes, you know that you can say, quit smoking, quit smoking, quit smoking, quit smoking every time they walk in the room. And until they decide to quit smoking, they're not going to quit smoking. And so talk about it if they're open to it. And that's the same thing with weight. We're not doing anything here. You talking about is actually not doing anything. I'm sorry, but it's not. You telling someone to diet and exercise is not working. We know that now. So stop. Ask if they want to talk about it. And if they do, explore other options. Meet them where they at. Where what have you done? Where have you been? Where are you going? What's your goals? What do you want? And how can I help you to achieve that? Because it's not working the other way. And on the Oprah thing, I'm like just torn about her, because on one hand, I think she was a victim of this, you know, and I also commend her for coming forward. But on the other hand, we watched her since the 80s contribute to diet culture. She was Weight Watchers, right? Like she was like the spokesperson for it. She walked out with that. She walked out with that thing. I remember like it was yesterday.
From that MetaFast diet that she was on. Was it? Yeah. Was it MetaFast? It was some sort of liquid diet.
Said she started gaining weight the next day, and it's one of the biggest she's ever had.
Yeah, she said that
thing with all the fat on it. Y'all remember?
Yeah.
Like, that's damaging.
That wagon.
Yeah.
I mean, she said it. She said, like, I am embarrassed. I'm embarrassed about all of that, you know, like, and I'm embarrassed that I even had this kind of metric or measure. I was, you know, and
she was a part of any of that.
Yeah, you know, and in the 90s, she did it again, right? And she got with, who was that, Robert Greene guy? The reason why I remember, my mom bought,
the chef guy?
She bought the audiobook and sent me a copy of it.
But like, in all fairness, that is Oprah. Oprah has always been like, I have trauma, I have this, I have that. Here's a new way I found to solve for it, and here's why it works for me. And let me have this person come in and tell you about it, right? Like, I mean, that's what I do with this show. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I was just saying, like, she was encouraging the reason. She said her metabolism was so screwed up from dieting. Of course it was. But she said Robert Greene, I guess she had to work out twice a day to lose the weight the second time in the 90s. And so, now looking back, that doesn't make sense. You shouldn't have to work out twice a day. No. That's a lot of time.
Yeah.
It's just like inhuman effort for you know, like you don't have
only human.
You know, like you don't have to, you know. It's sad.
Well, I'm glad she's talking about it, and I watched all the episodes, and we've done some breakdowns on the podcast about it. Because if you don't know, Oprah is like one of my American favorites. And for many, many reasons. But a lot of it is because I saw a woman in a bigger body that was very, very successful when I was a young girl.
Yeah.
And I was like, I want to do that. You know, and a lot of the reasons that I question the status quo and I go, let's talk about that, is because I watched Oprah do it. Right. So she's not perfect, but a lot of the reasons I am who I am and the things I do are because of what I saw in her. Right. Whether she was right or wrong at the time, and we look back and say, you made these mistakes. I can look back on my life and say, oh, so many, you know, but I think that in terms of this, we can't expect someone that doesn't know anything about medicine to have known about what they were possibly contributing to, right, with diet culture, because she was on the board of Weight Watchers. Like she owned like 8% of Weight Watchers. Like that was a thing. And then she kind of disappeared and we didn't hear about it for a long time. And then all of a sudden Weight Watchers came out and bought Sequence, which is a telehealth, so they could prescribe GLP1s. And then I exploded on the internet. I was like,
and you know, they don't talk about that anymore.
Not today.
In their advertisements, I don't really see it that much anymore.
Yeah.
It's they're running ads again. Yeah. Well, you can't get around the insurance company, right? So.
Yeah. Honestly, full predictions, and I said it on TikTok, it won't be long before they'll be selling compound. They'll figure it out, because you ain't going to meet those numbers if you can't get the medicine to your people, period. That's what's going to happen. You know, just saying, it's going to happen. Regardless. But I think that this has been such a good talk. I think that there are a lot of people and celebrities that are starting to talk a little bit more about this. A lot of people who are like struggling with menopause weight, who are talking about like the increased food noise, the
Miss
increased
Perry.
adipose tissue. Yeah. And
Very
I think it's a good conversation to have. Like, and there are people, like a lot of times these people misuse it, right? They take this medicine and they misuse it. However, we are still studying all the benefits of these medications outside of weight, right? Outside of insulin resistance. We're talking about Alzheimer's, we're talking about addiction. Like there's many different things. So I just think in general, if we take a note from your TikTok, let's just be kind and just lead with kindness and open your ears and your heart, and we'll just go from there. And, and I think that's the best way for doctors to behave. I think patients, if we could just all just do a little bit more kindness, I think we could get there,
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Well, this has been a lovely conversation. I feel like I went a little longer, but it was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks you guys.
Your contribution to our movement and our podcast. And we hope that you'll come on again. And I will put all the links to all of your things in the show notes so people can go, and your podcast, if you're okay with it, so that people can go see. I know you have the first 2 seasons. I'm sure people would love to listen to that. Look, I'm sorry. None of us know what the fuck we're doing with these kids. We don't. I'm sorry. We're all just like, it's a crapshoot. Like, you think you do the right thing and you're like even my conversation about the fuel, I didn't know how that was going to go, it would be great. I think it's really good to have guidance outside of, I just see his pediatrician when he's sick and then like once a year, So I think it's nice to have that. And I want to make sure that if you guys are open to it, if it's still, on, we would love to have it. Cool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That sounds wonderful.
I appreciate it so much.
All right. I'll go ahead and end, but Plus Sides team, hasta la pasta. We can tell everybody until we see you next time.
Bye.
"20 seconds a week to lose 20% of your weight in a year with diet and exercise. That's the power of GLP1s through Ro. Ro helps find the medication that's right for you, based on cost, availability, and your weight loss goals. Losing weight with GLP1s is possible through Ro.